Welcome back to the Stephen A. Smith Show. Got to turn my attention to a serious story that happened in Jackson, Mississippi this week, where 6 white police officers who called themselves the Goon Squad have been sentenced to decades in prison for torturing and abusing 2 black men named Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker. 4 of the former officers were sentenced earlier this week, while the last 2 were sentenced today. The incident happened in January of 2023 when the officers burst into the home without a warrant and assaulted Jenkins and Parker with stun guns and even a sex toy. All 6 men pleaded guilty to a total of 16 felonies related to the torture and sexual assault of Jenkins and Parker. The former police officers admitted to breaking into the home where the men were residing without a warrant. And why did they choose to do so exactly? Because a white neighbor reported that Jenkins and Parker were staying in a home with a white woman. As a result of their federal crimes, the former officers' sentences were as follows. Look right here. Christian Dedman, he received 40 years. Brett McAlpin received 27 years. Hunter Elward, 20 years. Daniel Opdyke, 17 and a half years. Jeffrey Middleton, 17 and a half years. And Joshua Hartfeld received 10 years. Are we still going to sit here with a straight face and act like racism doesn't exist in this country? Huh, white America? Are we going to do that? See, that's not to say that everybody who is white is racist. I would never say something like that. That would be incredibly irresponsible, insensitive, and flat out wrong. Because just because you're white doesn't make you a racist. But you know something, white America? You got to stop personalizing stuff and acting like the second somebody points a finger at somebody white that they must be talking about you too. As I've said repeatedly over the years on national television, if it ain't you, if you don't think like that, you wouldn't act like that, you wouldn't talk like that, you wouldn't treat somebody of a different ethnicity than you like that, we're not talking about you. But when you stand up and act as if America doesn't really have these problems, that they don't have a plethora of people who feel this way, who think this way, and if empowered would act this way, you've got your head in the sand. And if you stand around and do nothing and you say nothing, then automatically you're going to be assumed as being complicit in some way, shape, form, or fashion. It is the year 2024. This incident happened in 2023. And just because 2 black men were in a home with a white woman, that was deemed suspicious. Just because you heard somebody white call and say something suspicious was going on, you busted into a home without a warrant and proceeded to torture 2 black men. We've later come to find out that this stuff has been dated back to as early as 2004, which means it's been going on for 20 years. This is why when former GOP presidential candidate Nikki Haley, the former governor of South Carolina, former ambassador for the U.S. in the Trump administration, when she said that we're not a racist country. We've never been a racist country. Our goal is to make sure that today is better than yesterday. Are we perfect? No. Everybody right there knew, oh, your behind got to go. You can't be the president of the United States. Now, some would sit up there and look at other candidates, whether it's Trump because of the insensitive remarks that he spewed over the years, or with the Central Park 5 and all of these guys and what they had to go through for many, many years ago and him being excoriated for that. Or Biden with the crime bill in the 1990s that he proclaimed and owned as his own, although there were other culprits. The reality is everywhere we turn, no matter what direction we look in, we see problems, if not in the present, with our politicians, certainly in the past. And in the present, when it comes to the world that we're living in today, and the kind of rhetoric and the kind of vitriol and the kind of mayhem we see disseminating throughout our society. It's time to wake up. get our heads out of the sand. You can't deal with a problem you refuse to recognize. At least acknowledge that. Props to the court system, and specifically that judge in Mississippi who handed down these sentences. As the father of one of the victims, Michael Jenkins, pointed out, he's been in Mississippi for over 68 years, and he has never seen this kind of justice exacted against such heinous individuals until now. If Mississippi can find a way to do what's right, certainly the rest of the country can. Certainly. I'm joined now by New York Times investigative reporter Nate Rosenfield to discuss the facts of the case. Nate, first of all, how are you? Thank you for joining the show. How are you doing?
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Break it down for us right now. This occurred on January 24th, 2023, where two black men were basically assaulted, nearly killed, as far as I'm concerned, by 6 police officers in Mississippi. How did you first hear about this case?
So shortly after that event occurred, it was investigated by federal authorities, and the two men came forward with what happened to them. Local media picked up the story. We started looking into it over the summer, and an investigation that we released in November showed that this was not isolated to these two incidents. We found over 20 individuals who claimed that they had been tortured in a similar manner to the case that we heard sentencing on today. And what federal authorities said in court, which was one of the kind of groundbreaking events today, was that this was not just an isolated incident, that this was a long-standing pattern in a department where the senior leadership were encouraging their younger deputies to take part in torture, abuse, and forcing confessions, and also covering up evidence of crimes.
And when you said this was going on, it had happened in January, and then obviously it was learned about from people like yourself and others because a federal investigation was taking place. So they had heard about these 6 police officers, infamously known as the Goon Squad, for quite some time. And is it safe to say that the 2 victims in this particular case, had they not come forward and been willing to express their thoughts and their facts about what happened, that this would have been swept under the rug? Is that the impression that you got from covering this case?
Well, there were many others who had similar claims that were never heard of until these events occurred. And our investigation saw that, the earliest claims we learned about were 20 years ago. Throughout the event today, many people said that, including Michael Jenkins, the man who was shot, he said that if he hadn't survived that attack, it's quite likely that no one would have ever heard about it because afterwards he was able to come forward and speak about what happened.
Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker were the victims. Specifically, for those who don't know, what exactly happened to them?
Well, it's a grisly story. Essentially, their home was raided for no clear reason. There was a tip from a neighbor that they were behaving suspiciously, and a man who was called basically the ringleader of this attack by prosecutors today, Brett McAlpin, ordered this group of deputies to raid the home. They burst inside, no warrant, tased the men, beat them. They were sexually assaulted with a sex toy in the home. Food was poured on them to humiliate them. There were mock executions that occurred. And during the process, one of the deputies had his gun inside of Michael Jenkins' mouth, and according to federal authorities, accidentally fired a round inside of it, severing his tongue. At that point, the deputies tried to cover up the event. They disposed of surveillance camera footage in the home. They tried to find bullet casings and dispose of all this evidence, and told each other that they had to stick to the story that Michael had tried to shoot them with a BB gun that they found in the home, or else they would kill each other. There was a death threat that they placed on each other to keep quiet.
I'm wondering why didn't, and I mean, I'm not saying that you would know this, but it begs the question. I'm trying to figure out how are these two individuals still alive. If the officers went to this extent, to make sure that they were covering up a crime, the worst thing they could have possibly done is left them alive to possibly talk about it. You know how criminals act a lot of times. No witnesses, no witnesses. Any questions to the police officers, the former police officers who are now felons and destined for jail, of course? Any word from them as to why they didn't end up just committing murder?
That was not a question that was posed in court today, although I think it's a powerful one. One of the things I can say is that, based on our reporting, it suggested the possibility that this had been a long-standing set of practices in the department and that these guys had gotten away with a lot for a very long time. So they tried to cover up their crime and potentially thought they might have been able to do it successfully. They told the two men, they threatened them with jail time and even death if they spoke up. We had similar folks who told us that the deputy said the same to them and who had kept quiet for many years. So it's possible that they thought that they might have just been able to get away with it by brushing it under the rug. But it's a great question.
You had some people that got 17 years. One individual got 10 years. Just looking at some of these names here, Rankin County Deputy Brett McAlpin, he got about 27 years, if I remember correctly. Another deputy, Christian Dedman, got 40 years. I mean, what was the reason one got 40 years, another got 27, Allward got 20 years, Opdyke got 17 and a half years, Middleton, 17 and a half years, Joshua Hartfield, 10 years. Why the differences in sentencing?
So that's one thing that prosecutors and the judge spoke about today. One factor is there were actually two incidents that were covered in today's sentencing. The torture of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, and a separate incident that occurred a month prior to a man named Alan Schmidt, similar, where there was really horrific sexual abuse as well as physical violence. And so Christian Dedman, who received the most time, he was the lead narcotics investigator in the department. So he was a higher ranking officer within the bunch. He also was directly involved in the violence committed in both instances. He committed the sexual abuse in both cases, as well as physical violence. So that's why he received the highest sentence of the bunch. Brett McAlpin, who also received quite a high sentence, 27 years, the second highest. Again, I mentioned previously, federal prosecutors spoke about him as really being the ringleader behind all of this. And even though he was less involved in the direct physical violence in the case of Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker, witnesses routinely described him as being the one who sort of was orchestrating events. He was the chief investigator in the department, one of the highest ranking positions in the entire department. He'd been there for over 20 years. And it's our understanding, based on what prosecutors said and our reporting, that he really molded these men in this department to commit these acts of terror.
It reminds me of the movie Mississippi Burning that was starring Gene Hackman, even though that involved a murder. Nevertheless, that wasn't the case here in this particular situation, but the sentences obviously are incredibly profound. How is Braxton, Mississippi, and that area in the state of Mississippi reacting all of this now, particularly in the aftermath of Michael Jenkins' daddy speaking out and saying he's been living there for over 60 years, all of his life, and he's never seen justice like this exacted in the state of Mississippi. What's the tenor like down there?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think there's a lot of hope that this could be a turning point for the community of Rankin County and the state. I think that some are really trying to deal with this longer history of violence that's been brought up in court many times, as you spoke about in terms of Michael Jenkins' father's testimony. I have been, interested to see that many community members who come from all different races and classes and political viewpoints have spoken to me about the terror of this event, the shame they feel about their sheriff's department, and their desire for justice. I would say that, just based on talking to people in the community, that's definitely the majority view. And it seems that people are really looking for a way to step forward into a better vision of policing for this community.
By the way, reiterate, how many victims are alleged to have been victimized by these 6 police officers known as the Goon Squad?
So that's an interesting question. In terms of the case that was prosecuted today, in which these officers have pled guilty, there are 3 individuals. There's Michael Jenkins and Eddie Parker in one incident, and then there's a man named Alan Schmidt in a second incident. But prosecutors today spoke about multiple other incidents that they investigated, which apparently were used as part of the sentencing ruling as supporting evidence. And again, our investigation looked into similar accounts given by, we found over 20 people who talked about similar torture occurring to them. So it's unclear at this point how extensive this was.
Considering that, how long has it spanned, the time frame to which these things were occurring? Is it over the last 2 or 3 years? Is it over the last 10, 15, 20 years? How long has this quote unquote Goon Squad been together, reaping terror, heaping terror on folks?
Again, it's an open question. I can say that in our investigation, the earliest incident we heard about went back to 2004, which would have been the early days of Brett McAlpin's career. He joined the force, I believe, in 2000.
20 years.
And they were consistent. So the claims we heard extended throughout his career. We've also heard, about connections to similar abuses from the past. One of the Michael Jenkins's father, Melvin Jenkins, also spoke about former Simpson County Sheriff Lloyd Jones, whose nickname was Goon Jones, who was infamous, especially in the Black community in the area, for terrorizing local residents. And some have pointed to the connection between Goon Jones and Brian Bailey, who was considered Goon Jones to be a mentor of his.
Nate Rosenfield, you've been all over this story for months. Thank you for, doing a great job that you was doing and bringing this attention to the nation, letting us all know what's been transpiring down there. Thank you so much for your work on this story. Continue to do what you've been doing in your career. You take care of yourself, and thank you for everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks, Nate. Thanks so much.